Tonight we are going to be going over Freudian theory, psychosexual stages, psychoanalytic, and the defense mechanisms, as well as practice questions to tie it all together to make it make a little more sense than it already does. And starting at the top with psychosexual theory of development, there's mnemonics to remember the stages because a lot of times people are like, Phil, so complex for me. I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to recall all of this. And I do not recommend people memorizing things. I more or less tell them to be able to recognize and apply the information. But when in doubt, you can use these mnemonics to be able to remember these stages during the exam. First one, onions and potatoes look great. Each letter represents each of the stages. Oral for the onions, anal for the an, phallic, potatoes, looks for the latent, and great for genital. And then if that one doesn't really resonate well with you, you can go with old age prisoners love grapes, and each of them represent these stages as well. Old for the onion, or oral prisoners, because it goes kind of out of order, and that's why it's stranger, because we want to make sure that we understand it. But again, old age prisoners love grapes. Old, oral, age, anal, phallic prisoners, latent, love, and then grapes is going to be the last one with the genital. And if that one doesn't make sense to you as well, you can come up with whatever one makes sense for you. But these are two that people have found very, very helpful when walking into the exam. And you get a question like this, and you're like, oh my gosh. Because in the heat of the moment, when you're in the exam, your mind can go multiple different ways. So it's difficult to be able to recognize and apply it. Again, don't memorize every nick and cranny of these, but take what makes sense for you and walk into the exam and apply it. And the basis of the entire theory is Freud believed personality developed through a series of childhood events and stages where pleasure-seeking energies of the id, and we'll get into what each different one of those means, becomes focused on certain areas, which is all around the sexual sensitivity or pent up sexual energy or libido. So, if certain issues are not resolved at the appropriate stage, there are going to be fixations that can occur. And each of the different stages, I'm going to go through what the fixations can look like and what they can look like within questions as well. So, the fixations are persistent focus on the earlier psychosexual stages, but let's get into the different stages to make it all make a little bit of sense. But I wanted to provide a little bit of an overview so that we know why the basis of why this exists. The first one is the oral stage, and the ages are going to be pretty consistent with this based on the fact that these were based on how people develop. And there's other human developmental theories that the ages don't really resonate well with what they mean, but this one is one that would kind of correspond. So the oral stage is from 0 to 1 years old. So if you see someone in a question at this age range, then we're going to know that it is based on this. However, the oral stage is all based on survival. So it's primarily fixated on how a child is going to survive. So if you think of people, how people survive, food, we utilize our mouth or the oral part of our body to be able to survive. So it's all based on the rooting and sucking reflux, and it's important for that survival. And this is often articulated if you put anything up to a baby's mouth, it is going to fix its lips for survival. So that is where the mouth is a vital part to eating, and the infant derives pleasure from oral stimulation through gratifying activities such as tasting and sucking. And since the infant is entirely dependent on the caretakers or caregivers to help them survive, and that's where if there's neglect cases, it's going to be pretty terrible based on the fact that they're not going to have this. And that's where fixations can kind of happen, is if the caretakers or caregivers aren't really responsible in taking care of the child in order for them to survive. So the child develops a sense of trust and comfort through the oral stimulation of survival, because if there's a caregiver or caretaker that is helping you out, you are going to be more likely to feel connected to them because they're taking care of your needs and mending and attending to you. However, if the caregiver is not there for the child, or if the caregiver is neglectful in the feedings or not feeding them on time, then there's going to be a whole lot of discrepancies and fixations. So the primary conflict or goal with this entire stage is going to be the weaning process. So the child must be less dependent on the caretakers or caregivers in order to move on to the next stage. However, if they are weaned too fast or takes too long to wean them, that is where the fixations and problems can happen. And the fixation within this, but if you remember back, fixations are where the entire stage is not resolved. It is when a child and or individual has dependency on substances or relationships and or aggressive behavior when they feel their needs are not being met. Why? Because if you have unmet needs when you were a child, they can influence that. If you do not get your needs met now, have some chaos based on the fact that now you have the ability to take care of yourself. When you feel that other people are not there for you, it can cause a whole bunch of ruckus and conflict within the situation. So fixation can lead to a problem with drinking alcohol, smoking, eating, nail biting, or finger picking. Why? Based on the fact that that is part of the oral stage, or you need your mouth in order to complete these behaviors. So that's where it's going to be super duper important to understand where these come from in order to potentially help resolve these. So if you see in a question any of these types of behaviors, it could have Freudian type influences on it. And that's a lot of times where people get frustrated because they're like, I review all this information, none of it was on my exam, but it could be like cryptically put into the exam in order to make it happen. The next stage is going to be the anal stage, and this is from 1 to 3 years old. So Freud believed the primary focus of libido, or the sexual energy, was controlling the bladder and bowel movements within this stage. So the major conflict of this, or the major goal or test to see if they're going to develop a fixation or not, is toilet training. Why? Think of how someone is toilet trained, or through the anal. So the child has learned how to control his or her bodily needs, and developing this control leads to a sense of accomplishment and independence. However, a lot of times with human behavior, if it is done too quickly or not done quick enough, then it could lead to a lot of problems. So success is dependent on the way in which a parent or caregiver reacts or approaches toilet training. So parents utilize praise and or rewards for using the toilet at the appropriate time and encouraging positive outcomes, as well as to help the child feel comfortable and confident while trying. But again, if a parent's too hard on a child, or if they try to toilet train the child too quickly, that is where problems can occur. However, the most ideal parent is providing praise. They did it at the appropriate time. They're not punishing a child for not doing this, because if there is punishment for something that is outside of the control of somebody, then it's going to lead to more negative outcomes in the future. So, positive experience during the stage serves as the basis for people to feel confident and more competent and productive and creative adults. Why? Because when you're given the freedom and praised at an appropriate time, you are more likely to feel that you can do things on your own, and that if you put in effort and work within your situation, that you're going to get more positive results. However, if the parent is too difficult or provides punishment, discouraging words, or degrading, and even shaming and ridiculing the child for not using the toilet or having accidents, if you will, it can create a lot of difficulty for that child. So if they are being rooted in a harsh environment around toilet training, it can cause people to be more anxious. They can lack confidence when engaging in new behaviors. Why? Because toilet training is new behavior for the child. So they may be more reluctant than their peer that was provided a positive experience if they were treated poorly during the behavior. And it can be predictive of particular people. Why? Because if somebody around you was very harsh on you, was always degrading you, demeaning you for trying something new, or you feel that you're trying to develop yourself into a positive person and they're always degrading you, when you're around that person trying to do a behavior, you may be more reluctant to do it or more nervous to do it based on the fact that that person degraded you in the past. So that is where the fixation can happen. So fixation can develop in two different ways within this stage, and it's where inappropriate parental responses result in two negative outcomes. So if a parent's approach is too lenient, an anal expulsive personality can develop. And if you look closely at the word, the emphasis is going to be on too lenient. We have explosive. Think of an explosive. I have an explosive. That is where the person is going to be messy, wasteful, or destructive and can be angered easily. Why is that a thing? When someone does not have any consequence and or guidance, they're going to feel that they can do whatever they want, or they're not really going to have that punishment or consequence about their behavior. So anal expulsive type personality is like, and some of you may know some of these people going to their house, everything is just everywhere, not really having a whole lot of order within their situation. And it's not wrong. It's just when people don't have environments that are more controlled or they don't have guidance on how to do things, they tend to become what their environment has been. On the other end of the spectrum, if the parents are too short or begin toileting too early, an anal retentive personality can develop. And this is where a lot of you have already heard this term. This is the concept in society where people say that person is just anal. Why? Because they are retaining things. So the person is stringent, orderly, rigid, excessive, and overly controlling. That is where key emphasis on like retentive, because they're retaining everything that they can to ensure that things go a particular way. So if somebody was too short, meaning they're too harsh on somebody, they're always degrading somebody, this person is going to be more retentive or like recluse themselves out of the situation. And when they can't take control, they will. Or if somebody was done too early, meaning they started the behavior too early, they weren't developmentally ready, they may feel like they have to be on their game 100% of the time based on the fact that parent was too pushing them too hard in situations that they otherwise would not have been able to get into. Again, these are two fixations that can happen, and that's different because most of them only have one. So that's where kind of a quick review of the two stages that we have gone over so far. The oral, think of mouth, any fixations would occur when it is maladaptive behaviors that would involve the mouth, and this is involved around survival. Anal, think of like toilet training based on the fact that they're either being pressured too quickly or they're not given a lot of guidance. That is where the fixation and or difficulties would occur based on the fact that expectations and guidance are one important thing of developing positive behavior. The next stage is going to be the phallic stage. And I always tell people key emphasis on the part of it because it's how the person is feeling their situation. So if you think of a child that's feeling themselves, they're then going to start discovering things about their part of their body. So keep in mind that it'll make a little bit more sense in a little bit. So the primary focus of libido or the sexual energy is on the genitals. So at this age, the child begins to develop and discover the differences between the male and female genitalia. And that is where I always say key emphasis on the part of it because they're feeling themselves. They're feeling their body and discovering what exists with and for their situation. So boys begin to view their father figures as rivals or competition for their mother's attention based on the fact that they feel that their mother is trying to take their father from them, and or the Oedipus complex is where the child is wanting to possess their mother and desire to replace their father, as well as they feel that the father has harmed a mother by chopping her penis off. And a good example of this is Norman Bates. And if you've known Norman Bates, it's where wants to be with his mom, kills the mom, starts dressing up as the mom, and wants to be so much like her and starts hurting and killing the boyfriends that she's had based on the fact that he wanted to possess her and be in a relationship with her. And when that wasn't possible, poisoned her boyfriend at the time, and then kept her body around and then started dressing up and killing people as her, and then assumed that she was killing based on the fact that the Oedipus complex kind of took over his mind and all of his different behaviors. Kind of an extreme example, but kind of articulates where that son, aka Norman, wanted to possess his mother so much so that he was willing to go to extreme lengths. So Freud thought a male child who sees a naked girl for the first time believes that her penis has been cut off, and the child feels that the father's going to do the same thing for him. So that is where they kind of play it cool. And that's when they start meshing well with the father, because if you keep your enemies close, they're not really going to harm you. So that's where the child fears that their father's going to do the same. And that's where castration anxiety comes from in the situation because they're afraid and anxious that the father is going to castrate them, aka cut their penis off like the father did to the mother. Again, that's where they kind of want to possess the mom, but it's kind of like, whoop, gonna keep my hands off of that. And then some of you are like, well, what happens if they are a female? There is that part of the development as well, because the Oedipus complex is for the males or boys, and the electro complex is for the females. That's where the females desire their father, but notice she doesn't have a penis, which causes distress because they're like, I'm different from this situation. So this is where the female or the girl resolves her anxiety by repressing the desire for her father and substitutes it for her wish for a penis with a wish for a baby, based on the fact that that's where they can start developing a relationship with the mother, because that's how they can relate on that situation. So it's kind of on the other end of the spectrum of the development. So that is what is this stage is looking like, is they're starting to feel themselves, discover themselves, and their models, aka their parents or caregivers, are the example of what they're seeing, based on the fact that it's a grown person that possesses the same anatomy as they do. The next stage is going to be the latent stage, and key emphasis on late. Why? Because this is where their energies are going to be repressed because they feel like they are a late bloomer. So then they start possessing and putting more priorities into developing relationships with other people rather than focusing on the sexual energy. So that's why I keep emphasis on late. Within the latent stage, which is from 6 years old to puberty, is where they're not as focused on their anatomy and or the sexual energies, but I'm late to the party, so I need to socialize with everyone that I possibly can in order to start developing relationships. So this is where the superego continues to develop while the id's energies are suppressed. And we'll get into what superego and id and ego all mean in a little bit, but just kind of planting the seed and utilizing the lingo that meshes with the stages. So children develop social skills, values, and relationships with peers, as well as adults outside of their family. So again, picture a child that's going into a party. They're kind of late. They don't really know anybody. They're going to start socializing with as many people as they possibly can in order to start developing relationships. So the development of the ego and superego contribute to the stage's period of calm. So the id is going to be all that impulsive decision making and high energy. The ego is going to be that middle ground, and super egos where they're going to want to contribute and give back to other people. So this stage involves a child entering school and social interactions and becomes more concerned with their ability to fit into social groups that have similar interests. Again, they're trying to talk with everybody, but they're only going to keep around the people that they kind of mesh with. So that's how we kind of develop as humans. We hang around people that have similar interests as us or have same drive and same energy level as us. And we kind of aren't disassociating from other people that don't have similar interests, but we tend to mesh with the people that we fit in with. So the latent period is a time of exploration in which sexual energy is repressed and is dormant. And it is going to come rampant and raging its head a little bit. But again, picture somebody late to a party. They're not really focused on all of their sexual energies and anxieties, but just how can I fit in with this? So the major conflict of this stage is the development of a social network and or peer group to start gaining a sense of self. And if you remember, it started at 6 years old. Children typically start at 5 years old in school. So that's when they start developing that social skills and start prioritizing more relationships outside the family because they're spending less time with their family nonetheless. The fixation here, and what this would look like is if somebody's not fitting in with their peer groups or not as comfortable socializing with other people, it could have immaturity and inability to form fulfilling relationships as an adult. So, if somebody was not able to socialize as a young child, they're always ostracized or made fun of or bullied, it's going to be more difficult for them to trust other people and make connections with people as an adult because what you had learned when you were a child typically is played out when you are an adult. Of course, you can change this, but for this example, that's what that fixation would look like because if somebody is finding it difficult to connect with people now, there was likely something in their past that is dictating it. So this would look like when someone is rejected or too anxious to try new things, thus isolated from other people and not trying to develop relationships, and they want to avoid experiencing rejection like they have had in the past. The next stage is going to be the genital stage. So this is where they start focusing more on their genitals and how they can utilize it. And it starts within puberty and it ends at death, based on the fact that once somebody hits puberty, all those dormant or repressed sexual energies flies out. What is being held in must be expounded at some point. It's like a slingshot that is drawn back. You'd have to release it at some point in time. So the onset of puberty causes the libido to become more active and revved up like an engine, and then they want to release this. So this is where they start developing a strong sense of sexual interest in the opposite sex and or the same sex, depending on what the preference of the person is. And this is where they are still going to try and socialize and fit in with peer groups, but it's not focused so much so on having sustaining relationships, but it could be just focused on having sexual relationships nonetheless. So where in earlier stages, the sexual energy was solely on the individual. So how can I get my needs met? How can I have similar interests as other people? We start having a sense of connection with the welfare of others and the well-being of them as well. So it's not focused on me, egocentric, like I need my needs met. They may start focusing on how can I give back to other people and how can I get into a relationship that I care about somebody and make sure their needs are met as well. So if there was success in previous stages, someone should be well balanced and have a sense of connection in a specific subsystem. So if everyone went linearly through all the different stages, they would have been able to have that sense of independence and trust for survival and know that they can get their needs met. If they weren't like super focused on or had too lenient of toilet training, they would be able to have independence, trust to do new things. And then the phallic stage, they would have developed that sense of identity within themselves. The latent stage, they would have been experimented and explored with different peer groups and had people that they can resonate on and find that identity within themselves. Within this, they would then have more of a freedom to be able to explore what they want to do, because when you feel comfortable with yourself, you tend to be able to express yourself in the best way that you know how, and you'd be able to express your sexual energy in a healthy manner. The main conflict here is to establish a balance between the various areas of life. So that's where it's kind of complicated here. Is a lot of times people hear the genital stage and say it's all focused on them having as much sex as they possibly can. Of course, once that happens, you're going to then start trying to develop a society in reality that you want to sustain over time. So Freud believed that the ego and superego were formed and functioning at this point because, again, the id is going to be all those impulsive decision making, all those pent up energies that are going to be released. The ego is going to be that equilibrium to be able to keep everything going, and the superego is going to be more focused on giving back and helping other people. And as I stated, we're going to kind of get a little bit deeper, but to plant the seed now, the id, easy way to remember the id, ID equals impulsive decision making, because it demands immediate satisfaction of the most basic needs and wants, such as impulsive demands or impulsive decision making. The ego attempts to find balance between the id and superego. So I always tell people go. Why? Because E equals evaluate and then go, because this keeps us in check and it's the middle ground. And the super ego, I always tell people to think of a superhero. So it attempts to serve the best interest of others and finds it difficult to think of oneself. So, easy example to think about this, think about Tom and Jerry or any older cartoons. We have the character and or human, and then there's that devil and angel on the shoulder. The devil is going to be the id. It's that impulsive decision making part of the body that's like, just do it, man. It's not a big deal. And then the super ego is that part that is the angel that's like, nah, think of everyone else. It could be harmful if you did that. And again, the ego is that person that is in the middle that's like, man, what should I do? And then the id and super ego try to influence the decision making. And of course, I'll get into it a little bit deeper in a little bit, But let's get into the next part, because I wanted to plant the seed to make it make sense when we get into the next part, which is the levels of the mind. So, segueing into psychoanalytic theory, this is where a client and or person is seen as a product of their past, and treatment involves dealing with the repressed material and the unconscious. So that's where Freud always thought that everything could be discovered based on your childhood, or everything that you influence could be rooted within this. So personality arises because of attempts to resolve conflicts between the unconscious, sexual and aggressive impulses, and societal demands to restrain or keep them in check within these impulses. Again, as we go through this, and an easy way to keep your mind focused on this is picture somebody on a couch in that stereotypical therapy, Freudian style, as we go through that. So the three levels of the mind are the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. So conscious, if you think of somebody that is conscious or aware, they are able to recognize the thing around it. So conscious, if you think of somebody that is conscious, it is a state of being that is aware. So this consists of those thoughts that are of focus and in the now, or where our attention is currently at. So it's all the information that you can pay attention to at this given moment. So I can hear some noises in my apartment, I can see the lights, I can remember what I did prior to the session, or I can remember the things that I'm about to say. Some of you, on your perspective, may be able to hear my voice. You may be like, this makes a lot of sense. This may make no sense at all. And while he's kind of going slow or he's going too fast, everybody is going to have things on their conscious, or you're worried about things that you have to get done after this, or you're doing something currently during this session. So it's all the information that is easily accessible to you at this given moment. So it's your thoughts and perceptions, and the small amount of mental information we know about is actually to be on your mind. Couple of examples. This room is warm. I'm going to be hanging out with my friend tonight, and I'm excited. And an easy way to think of somebody that's conscious is wake and fully functional, because if somebody's unconscious, they're knocked out. They're sleeping. They're like, but again, if somebody is conscious, they're aware and ready to react at any given moment. The next level of the mind is pre-conscious. Key emphasis on pre. Why? Because that means prior to. And if you remember, conscious is aware. So this is prior to someone being aware of something. Stated in a different way, it's all the information out of somebody's current attention, but is readily available if needed, because it'd be impossible for someone to know all the information that they currently know at every given moment. Why? We'd never get anything done. We'd have like flight of idea and all of these just worrying thoughts and all of these different things. Again, some information is easily accessible to us when it is needed. An example of this, let's say I'm driving my car, tire pops. I'm not automatically, as I'm driving, thinking how to change a tire all the time. Or I'm at work talking to a client. I'm not like, this is how you change a tire. However, if I need to access that information, it is easily accessible to me. Or if I don't know how, then we'll get into that a little bit later, but there's always access to information at the palm of our hands. Let's get a little bit deeper into what this could actually look like. So it could be the thoughts and feelings that can be brought to the consciousness if somebody brings it up. These things we can become aware if we want to. Couple of examples beyond the tire example. My best friend's phone number, how to make a recipe such as like cookies, or if somebody's like, hey, how do you grill chicken? Stuff like that. Stuff that you're not thinking about all of the time, but that is easily accessible to you at this given moment. So these are typically going to be memories or stored knowledge within our vaults of our mind that we can become aware of with little effort. And an easy way to remember the preconscious is it's somebody that is awake, but with effort can be. It'd be like if somebody was laying down for a nap, but they're not automatically sleeping, you might just be able to nudge them and be like, hey, da 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 da. And they're actually able to pop up and get things rolling. However, the next stage is somebody that is on the couch, knocked out. You're like having horns in their ear. You're yelling. You're trying to get them out. You're like, fire. And they're like, they're knocked out. And that would be the unconscious. And that's going to be a key emphasis on because means not able to. So it's not able to become conscious without great deals of effort. And this can be a defense mechanism for some people, and we'll get into those in a little bit, as well as these are just things that you may not be able to recall, even if people provide you prompts and or things to be aware of. So, stated in a different way, it's the thoughts, feelings, desires, and memories in which individuals have no awareness, but that can influence every aspect of their daily life. So, these things are things that we are unaware of and cannot be aware of without great deals of effort. So, these are where Freud was like, yes, we need to bring these things out of the unconscious because they're negatively impacting people as we go along. So, these are things that are often too frightening or too painful for somebody to acknowledge without somebody exploiting it. So this is where somebody could have triggers of things that we may not even know exist until we experience them. So, for example, not wanting to be around dogs and not really knowing why. So, you're uneasy when a dog walks up and you're, oh my God, there's a dog. And people are like, what? It's okay. That's just Cree. He's doing all right. And it's like, no, man, I need to get the heck out of here. That dog's pretty vicious. And it's like, he's licking your leg. Yeah, with venom and ready to, and it's going to fall off soon. Again, they don't understand why they are worried about it, but it does kind of bring up some things for some people. However, when the person was a child, they were attacked and they do not remember. Somebody, like, let's say a parent comes and they're like, man, that person was so afraid of a dog. And it's like, yeah, well, Phil got bit by a dog when he was a child. And that's probably why he doesn't really want to be around dogs. I may not even be able to remember. However, the other person is able to remember for me. Another example, when you think about the exam, you picture that you fail and it makes you anxious, but you prefer not to think about it. So you're not really able to acknowledge and or learn from it. Or let's say when you were younger, you failed the test and everyone like kind of made fun of you for not knowing something. So now if somebody brings up a topic you don't know, you kind of freak out and go, oh my God, I need to get out of here, or divert the attention away from what you're currently doing. So the unconscious is often linked to traumatic events in some way, shape, or form. So an easy way to remember what the unconscious is somebody is sleeping, so I have no idea what's going on around me. The person is asleep to the topics that they are unaware of. So you don't know what you don't know, but once you know it, then you can grow from it. So, a kind of a quicker view of the level of the mind. Conscious, think of somebody that's conscious and aware. It's all the things that you can readily have available to you at this given moment. Pre-conscious, key emphasis on pre, which means prior. So, it's prior to us being conscious to those things, meaning we're not thinking about it all the time, but we're able to access it without little effort. And then unconscious, un means not existent. So, you're not able to recall or bring these things out of you without great deals of effort. Let's get into the three components of personality. And this is the seed I've been planting almost throughout the entire session, which are the id, ego, and superego. So the id again, ID, I, impulsive, D, and decision making. Why? Because if somebody's reacting out of their id, it's them being impulsive in some way, shape, or form. Stated in a different way, it's where someone is operating at an unconscious level according to the pleasure principle, meaning I want this or I'm going to do this regardless of the consequences around me. And it's coming from the force of people wanting gratification or satisfaction out of their situation because we believe that we should never have any discomfort or dissatisfaction in any way, shape, or form. So it's the instinctual energy that contains biological urges, such as impulses towards survival, sexual impulses, and or aggression in order we have to defend ourselves. So the id is present at birth. So if you think of a child, they don't really have the thought process of like, wow, I shouldn't run in the road. I see my friend across the road. So you see a child dart across the road without any decision making process. But as an adult, it's like, no, I'm just going to wait on the other side. But it's like the kid sees something and just rips across as much as they possibly can. And it's derived out of the survival and destructive urges that are naturally present within everybody in every situation. So the survival urge is something that helps the person survive and it directs life sustaining activities such as breathing, eating, and sex for reproduction. And the energy created is libido. That's why we call libido sexual energy, because it's naturally something that we are rooted to do within our situation. So the survival urges are urges that are essential for sustaining life in individuals as well as the continuation of the species. Procreation, thirst, hunger, and pain avoidance. So that's where a lot of times we would do things for our survival that we otherwise wouldn't do. So, kind of a funny example and not like a human basic need, but those that love coffee, this example is going to resonate with you. I know it does me. When I don't have coffee, I just start getting headaches. I start getting frustrated. I start getting irritable. And let's say you're going to Starbucks. I really don't go to Starbucks, but I heard the lines are super long. You may have the urge to cut in front of somebody in the line if somebody doesn't notice that there's a gap in the line in order to get your caffeine sooner than other people. Or have another example, you may steal food in order to survive and help your family thrive. If you had the means to pay for the food, you otherwise would not steal it. So, this is our natural instinct to do whatever we need to do to survive and thrive within our situation and avoid pain at all cost. That is what the survival urge is. Destructive urge, on the other hand, survival helps life sustain. Destructive are the set of forces within every human that wants things to be destroyed. So when the energy is directed outwards towards others, it's seen as aggression and or violence. And if this destructive urge is focused on the person in general, it can be noticed as self-harm. However, these are unconscious urges, and that's where a lot of times you may enjoy destroying things that you otherwise didn't know. You're like, wow, this is really, really fun. It's like you're destroying things, but it's not on your mind all the time. Like, yeah, pick this up and throw it. But if it happens, like, wow, that was kind of oddly satisfying. So, this is where the person has unconscious desire to die, but the life instinct largely repels this. So, our survival urges will repel off the destructive urges and not have us want to kill ourselves or kill everyone around us or destroy everything around us, because it's the survival urges are stronger than the destructive urges most of the time, unless put into a situation where that would not be true. So, for example, people with trauma and abuse histories tend to reenact past experiences without realizing it. So, if you were in a past abusive relationship or you grew up with an abusive situation, your instinct may be inherently to get into a relationship where they may abuse you, where you did not notice that that was happening. Or if you grew up in a household where everybody was like kind of controlling, or that somebody would tell you what to do, you may instinctively get into a relationship where that person is kind of controlling everything that you do and telling you what to do, and you may not even really realize it. And that is based on the fact that our minds are so intelligent that they try to recreate everything. That's why a lot of the tendencies that you do currently in your life, and this is kind of generalizing, so forgive me, but most times we as humans do what our parents had done, or if what our parents had done is so graphic and so destructive to us, we may be the total opposite because we're focusing our energy on being different than they were. Couple of examples to put flesh to this concept: a baby will cry to get its needs met, and young children will have to a fit to get something they want. So the baby wants to sustain life by crying like, hey, I need food, and that is their survival instinct. Or young child having a fit like, hey, I need this. Or they're yelling in the grocery store that they want a teddy bear, they want an ice cream, they want anything. That's the destructive urge, is like, I'll destroy anything in my path to get what I want. Another example: someone eats a donut at work, even though they may be on a diet. That's where the it is like, eat the donut, eat the donut, eat the donut. You may have been driving to work, you're doing good on a diet, you're having a good day, but that donut's in front of you, and the it is like that devil on the shoulder, like, yeah, man, one bite ain't gonna hurt. And then one bite leads to you eating two donuts. Again, if it wasn't in front of you, the urge wouldn't have been there. Another example: a teenager wants a pair of shoes that they cannot afford. Instead of saving money, they steal it. It is like, just do it, man. Live in the moment. YOLO. You need to get what you want. Another example: someone fails their ASWB exam, and instead of reflecting on their process and what they needs they have, they go and buy more materials because they aren't willing to accept they failed, or what they have done is not give themselves enough time or reflect enough about what they need. And that's where a lot of times most people's impulsive urge is, I need to get as much materials as I possibly can, when what they have currently right now may be enough for their situation. That's where the it is like, yeah, man, just do it. Live in the moment. You need as much as you possibly can because more materials is better for you than not. And it may not be the truth. Again, it may be that there is a deficit, but the it is trying to amplify that and being like, yeah, man, you ain't enough. You need to get more. More is better. And that is where the id can tend to lie to somebody. The next component is the ego. Key emphasis on E and then go. Why? Because I always tell people that it's evaluate before you go, or shout out to Frozen, let it go, because it's letting go of those impulsive decision making and allowing for you to be more in the moment and think of consequences prior to being able to react. So either you're evaluating something prior to making a decision or you're just letting it go. All of those impulsive and decision making things and living in the moment. So the ego is the component that manages the conflict between the id and the constraints of the real world, because the id makes and convinces you that you have all the power in the world and you can do whatever you set your mind to and that you should be able to satisfy yourself 100% of the time, regardless of the negative impacts on other people. So the ego's goal is to satisfy the needs and demands of the id. So the ego's goal wants to keep the id in check, but it also wants to make sure it's not destroying society or reality. Some of the parts are unconscious, whereas other parts are preconscious or conscious. So the ego operates on the reality principle. And if you remember, the id was on the pleasure principle. I need pleasure in 100% of the situations. And the ego is more on that reality of I need to stay within reality in order to make sure that one, I'm getting my needs met, but I'm also not destroying everyone else's reality as well. So it's the awareness that gratification has to be delayed in order to accommodate the demands of the real world. So the ego's role is to prevent the id from gratifying its impulses in a socially inappropriate manner. Because again, some people's impulses and the way that they express them can impede what the rules of society contain. So there are two types of ego reactions: ego syntonic and ego dystonic. Why? Because ego syntonic is where the person is in sync with what they are supposed to be doing. Why? Because these are behaviors that are in sync or socially acceptable according to the ego. So it's guilt free because the ego is comfortable with the decision. So ego syntonic is in sync with what society would have wanted you to do. So ego dystonic is dissync or out of sync of what society would have wanted you to do. So it's not socially acceptable according to the ego. Why? Because the ego is trying to satisfy the id as well as society. So ego dystonic are things are dissync or out of sync of what would be expected. So when somebody acts in their ego dystonic or has an ego dystonic behavior, they're going to have guilt because the ego is bothered or uncomfortable with the specific behavior and or multiple behaviors within the situation. So that's where, if it's ego syntonic, it's in sync with what the ego wanted to do because it satisfies society and you do not have guilt about doing this. So let's go back to the donut example. Let's say you're not on a diet, you're going to eat a donut without even caring. It's like, but if you are on a diet, you are going to have some guilt about that because you're like, man, I want to do this or I want to do that. However, that is where you want to be careful based on the society or situation the person is in, because we as humans want to put our reality, our expectations on other people, and that is where we have conflicts because my ego syntonic behaviors may be different from your ego syntonic behaviors. So you may be viewing me as ego dystonic and I may be viewing myself as ego syntonic. So that's where you want to make sure that the relationships that you get into, that you're communicating what behaviors are appropriate or inappropriate within the context of the situation. So let's look what ego strength looks like. So ego strength is how strong someone's morals or beliefs within the situation are. So it's the ability of the ego to effectively deal with the demands of the id, ego, superego, and reality. So it's how well can the ego control the id, aka the impulsive decision making, superego, aka the superhero complex of wanting to help everybody and itself, as well as reality. Because people, depending on the situation you're in, reality could be too demanding or too lenient, depending on the situation. So if somebody has too much ego strength, it leads to rigid or stubborn behavior. So if somebody is so strong-willed on what they feel and believe, they're not going to let themselves have any satisfaction within the situation. Too little ego strength, aka your ego is literally gone. And again, we're not talking about ego as in the fact of how people feel about themselves. It's how in sync are you with reality and the demands of what you want for yourself. So if you have too little of ego, aka not evaluating before you go, it leads to feeling torn or flippant when placed in a decision-making situation. Again, if somebody puts you in a decision-making role and you don't really have a strong moral compass of what is appropriate or what is inappropriate, you're going to be looking for other people to make decisions for you. But if you're too strong within your situation, you're not going to listen to any feedback or any information from other people. And it's going to be difficult for you to fit in with other people. So there's not a right or wrong thing because, again, whatever relationships or context you're within means that you're going to fit in or be annexed away from the situation. So, an example that is not even provided on the document, and then I'll give other examples as well, is me wearing a backwards hat and a t-shirt. I wouldn't walk in to corporate America wearing backwards hat and a t-shirt and provide a presentation to them because I would be sticking out like a sore thumb. However, me being in front of a camera on YouTube and saying, hey guys, Phil coming back here with another video, kind of in context within that, and people are like, wow, kind of like the laid back style, makes a lot more sense. He's not like robotic and isn't like super rigid. But again, depending on the reality and situations the person is in, can dictate whether it's appropriate or inappropriate. Other examples within the ego is a teenager realizes he doesn't have enough money to buy a desired item, so he buys a cheaper alternative. So the ego was able to evaluate the id's urge to want to steal, and it's like, I can buy another item and still satisfy this need. Because again, the ego wants to satisfy the id as well as the confines of reality. Another example, person sees donuts in the break room at work and decides whether they want to stick with their diet or eat one. Again, the ego evaluates the id's urge to eat the whole box and realities, which is that's inappropriate based on the fact that you have to share with everyone else. So they may eat a small piece of a donut or have a healthy snack to still satisfy that urge within their confines. And the total other end from the id, because remember, the ego is like the cartoon or the human in the example of the devil and the angel. So the superego, I always tell people that you have to think of a superhero. Why? Because they're trying to save everybody. So you can't have it, and they try to save the morals and values of the person in general. So this is the moral component of the personality. It contains all the moral standards learned from their parents and society. So this is somebody that is going to stick so close to the book that they fit in with every single person that they're trying to align with. So it forces the ego to conform with not only reality, but the ideas of morality. So it causes individuals to feel guilty when they go against society's rules. Again, the id is like, do whatever you want. Super ego, trying to be a superhero, is like, make sure it's for the good of everyone else. And then the ego is like, yo, what am I even supposed to do within the situation? So it operates out of the morality principle. So if you think about it, we had the pleasure principle, we had the reality principle, and now we have the morality. So the morality principle is the gauge of right and wrong that are accepted by an individual or group influenced by their parents and or society. So super ego is made up of the conscience given to a person by their parents and or caregiver as a young lad and or lassie, and society indicating what is right and wrong, and the ego ideal. And the ego ideal is going to be what is the ideal situation for everybody and what is the framework and template that you were going to be put in within the situation. So we call this the pride principle within this. So ego ideal is the ideal role that your parents and or society would have you do. So it is the idea that people have what they would like to be and are given to by their parents or society. So for example, everyone in your family is a lawyer, so you feel like you have to become one. Again, it's that ideal thing of what your parents and or society is like, you need to do this. Another example, if everyone at your job passes their ASWB exam on their first try, you feel like you have to do so as well. Why? Because that's the ideal thing of the situation that you're currently in. So if everyone around you is wanting you to do that, that is what you're going to have to do within the situation. It's like, well, what am I supposed to do? It's we typically become the environment of what we are put in. So it's the ideal situation for people that are in similar situations as you are or you want to be. And the conscience, on the other end, is our view of what is considered to be wrong. And you can think of it as an internal set of rules. So we have that ego ideal, and then we have our own conscience, which is like, this is right, this is wrong. And we kind of have a mixture of all of it. And again, everyone's conscious or what the ideal is different. So this is when, if we break outside of the rules, the C superego considers our behavior to be bad. So it's kind of dysonic of what we were doing, and it's out of sync with what our context happens. So this is where people may have guilt or remorse based on the actions that they did. Other people may look at the person's actions and be like, man, everyone else would have done this. Or this is where somebody is too harsh on themselves when they make a mistake, or they don't get to where they want to go based on the fact that they didn't fulfill the ideal role that somebody once told them that they should do. And this is where information about these components is viewed as bad by our parents and society. So this is where we kind of go away from that ego ideal and start doing what we feel is best, but we feel negative about it. So these behaviors are often forbidden and lead to bad consequences, punishments, feelings of guilt or remorse. So that is where, when we go away from the ego ideal, we tend to be punished for it. So, for example, if somebody is utilizing substances, maybe they're stealing, maybe they're having premarital sex when they're in a religious family, failing the exam, missing social events, like getting a specific degree, etc., you may be annexed or isolated away from your situation based on the fact that you went away from the ego ideal. And it's kind of like you having this huge sense of guilt and or shame based on you wanting to be your own person within the situation. So kind of a quicker view of each level of personality. The ID equals impulsive decision making, because that's where all of your impulsive decision making is occurring, or all your impulsive urges are coming from. The ego, E, evaluate before going or let it go, based on the fact that it's trying to let go or evaluate all the impulsive thoughts that somebody's having before going in order to not destroy the person's situation and or life. And then when we look at the strengths, if you're too evaluative, you are going to be paralyzed by analysis. And then if you're too little, you're going to be looking at everyone else to solve your problems. And then super ego, think of that superhero that's trying to do things for the good of everyone else, not just kind of doing what they feel is right, which would lead us into the ego ideal, because we have ideal roles and templates that were put into our situation based on our parents and or society forcing us to fulfill roles. And that's where a lot of shame and guilt and all of these things can come from, based on the fact of you being out of sync with what society said your ideal should be. Let's look at how the mind typically copes with all of these things, which are the defense mechanisms. So, the defense mechanisms are psychological strategies that are unconsciously used to protect a person from anxiety arising from unacceptable thoughts and or behaviors. So, it's used to protect from fears as well as perceived harm. Key emphasis on perceived harm, because the harm may not actually be real, but your mind has convinced you that it is real. And again, it's unconscious. So it's not something that you're aware of, but you may be stunting growth based on the fact that your mind is convincing you that situations are dangerous or you shouldn't proceed within situations. And this is where the id, ego, and superego are the main forces driving the specific strategy and or strategies, multiple strategies that you're implementing based on the fact that you tend to utilize the defense mechanisms that you've seen effective for other people or were shown as a child. So they're automatic, involuntary, and usually unconscious reactions to exclude unacceptable thoughts, urges, threats, and impulses from the awareness of fear, disapproval, punishment, and or negative outcomes. So the goal of these is to protect yourself and to ensure that if something is too painful for you to experience, that it is delayed and or not even acknowledged at all. And there are going to be three types. There's going to be primitive, there's going to be less primitive, and then there's going to be mature defense mechanisms. And I will break down each of them, and then I'll provide examples for each of them as well. And then we'll go over practice questions to tie it all together. So primitive, think of when you think of primitive, think of primate. So these are the prime examples of defense mechanisms that don't really take a whole lot of conscious effort based on the fact that primates in primitive times were based on survival only. So they often predicate on a mistake or inaccurate representation of social reality because it's too painful for you to acknowledge that you've made a mistake. So your mind tries to defend against it. So you work to avoid short term pain, generally, which does not result into a constructive outcome. So if you're utilizing a primitive defense mechanism, think of primitive times of survival, and when we want to survive, we're willing to do anything or exploit anything that we possibly can. It's not often going to lead to a long term result that we are trying to do. So they are not much help for people looking for ways to solve a problem. They're just kind of a band aid over the overall problem that somebody's existing and or experiencing, and they are first learned during childhood and may persist into adults who were harmed in a significant way during their childhood. And let's see what we got to tie it all together. The first one up to bat is denial. Key emphasis on deny because the person denies that the situation exists or that it is as big as it actually is. So what is denial? It involves blocking external situations and or events from awareness. And if somebody is in a situation and it's too much for them to handle, the person will refuse to experience it at all or acknowledge that they have done an action that can hurt somebody and or that their behavior is any maladaptiveness to it. Stated in a different way, it's outright refusal to admit or recognize something has occurred or is currently happening at this moment. So the person may accept responsibility yet minimize the impact. So somebody outright refuses it, or they acknowledge, yeah, I do this, but it's not even that big of a deal. A couple of examples to tie it all together. Somebody who smokes cigarettes may refuse to admit that smoking is bad for health by citing random facts to back it. For example, my grandfather lived to be 90. He smoked every single day. So I'm going to be able to smoke and outlive most of the people on the planet based on the fact that I'm different and or I have superpowers that other people do not possess. Again, denial, denying the fact that cigarettes can be bad for health based on the facts of what their experiences is. Because what we tend to experience or want to defend, we find ways to defend it in some way, shape, or form. Another example, a person is unable to pick up subtle signs that his relationship is over or may minimize his feelings after it has ended. So, what does that look like? Somebody may tell you, like, hey, Phil, you're no longer going to be in this relationship. I saw your girlfriend with another guy and they were kind of all over each other and they kind of talked to me about it and they say they don't want to be with you anymore. And I might be like, you're lying. You don't even know them as well as I do. And they may have actual facts and signs to show me. And I am like, you Photoshop that. You're totally full of crap. I know better than you. Or I might acknowledge it and be like, yeah, it's not even a big deal, dude. I didn't even really care about her. Or it's not even a huge deal. You know, I've been looking at other girls too, or I've been dating other people. Again, I'm denying and or minimizing. So it is a huge spectrum of outright of refusing that something is true or denying if provided something in general. Another example, failing the ASWB exam and saying the exam was not even that hard. I just not even try. So denying that you wanted to pass, or if it didn't go how you wanted to, minimizing the impact of it that it has on you. Because when people fail the exam, feels terrible. It's like, man, this is the worst thing that could happen to me. And I tried so hard. I put in all this effort. But if somebody's exercising denial, they're like, it's not even a big deal. I just did it to see what it would feel like, or I just did it because I didn't want my money to go to waste, etc. The next defense mechanism within the primitive realm is reaction formation. Key emphasis on react. Why? Because the person reacts in a different formation than they're actually experiencing. So it's expressing an emotion opposite of what you're actually experiencing. So it's unacceptable feelings are expressed as the opposite. So for example, let's say I'm excited, I'm happy, but I'm looking like I'm mad. Or I'm mad and I am like super happy and cheery and doing things for other people. So it's taking on the opposite feelings, impulses, or behaviors to avoid social consequences. So let's say I'm super mad at somebody. I want to hit them. I want to destroy their life, but I'm doing nice things for them and I'm complimenting them. People would be like, what in the heck is this guy doing? Couple more examples. A woman who is dissatisfied with her boss compliments her boss on a job well done. And somebody might on the outside go, I thought you just said you hated this lady, but you're doing something nice. Another example. A boy likes a girl, yet ignores her and acts uninterested when she's around. Again, you have affection for somebody, you're attracted to somebody, and you completely ignore them. Somebody might be like, man, I thought Phil liked that girl. And they're like, but he's ignoring her. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So, reaction formation is you're reacting in the opposite formation. Couple more examples to bring it home. A man is angry at his brother and wants to kill him. Instead, he gives him a hug. Not a malicious hug, but a comforting hug. The last example, someone is nervous to take their ASWB exam and tells everyone they're excited and they have no doubt in any way, shape, or form. And somebody might be like, man, I thought you said that you were nervous, but you're telling everyone that you're excited, you have no worries, you're going to kill it easily. But again, you react in the opposite formation than you actually feel. The next defense mechanism, projection. Key emphasis on project. So think of a projector. You are projecting your feelings, thoughts, and experiences onto somebody else as it is true. Or you think of projecting, your projectile is where you throw something away. So you are putting something onto somebody else. Couple of examples, feeling overwhelmed and saying, dang, it looks like Kim is overwhelmed. So I am feeling overwhelmed, but I say Kim is feeling overwhelmed because it's too difficult for me to acknowledge that I'm overwhelmed, that I project it onto somebody else to normalize it for people to be overwhelmed. So that way I can say that I'm overwhelmed as well. Another example, you hate someone and say, geez, this person does not like me. So you say somebody else doesn't like you when you don't like that person to see how people will react. And if they're like, yeah, I don't think they like you, it would be easier for you to then say, yeah, I don't like them either, to normalize the situation. So it's not taking responsibility for the situation. And again, the primitive defense mechanisms aren't here to solve a problem, but it is just appeasing the person and or reducing anxiety or angst in the moment. Another example, somebody is cheating on a significant other and they accuse them of cheating on them. So it's kind of like a twisted vine of, hey, that person's cheating on me. There's no evidence that the person's cheating on you, but you're cheating on them. So you blame them for the behavior to see if they are actually do it to make your behavior more acceptable or to have the environment condone the behavior so that way you have justification for how you feel or the things that you had actually done. The next defense mechanism, acting out. Key emphasis on act. Why? Because this is where you put action or act out the emotions that you particularly have. Stated in a different way, the individual copes with stress by engaging in actions rather than reflecting on the internal feelings that they have. So you aren't expressing your emotions, but you're putting action, aka acting out the emotions, without ever expressing them. Couple of examples. Someone may attempt suicide for people to show concern. They may not express the pain or hurt that they're experiencing, but they may attempt suicide for people to show concern for their situation because they may not otherwise know. Another example, a child may skip school to show they hate school. They may never express, I hate school, but they're acting that out by just never showing up. Another example, Phil avoids his boss to show he hates his job. He doesn't really want to express that he doesn't like his job to his boss, but just avoids them so that way he doesn't have to express that emotion. Last example, I failed my exam. Instead of talking about it, I buy another program to study with. So I never express the pain and hurt it was like to fail my exam, but I put it into action by buying another program and never really reacting and solving and coping with the failed attempt. Next defense mechanism, and the last primitive one, is regression. Key emphasis on regress, because when somebody regresses back to something, they go back to an old behavior or priorly early developmental stage. Stated in a different way, so when somebody is confronted with an undesirable situation, the person copes by reverting back to patterns of behavior used in earlier developmental stages. Couple of examples to articulate this. After the divorce of his parents, a 10-year-old wets his bed. So it's not developmentally appropriate typically for a 10-year-old to wet the bed, but to cope with the divorce of his parents, he starts wetting the bed to express it. Another example, someone is sick and will cling to their mother, such as a baby would. Last example, someone is stressed out at work and begins sucking their thumb. So it wouldn't be developmentally appropriate for people to suck their thumb, but to soothe themselves, they may suck their thumb. Let's segue into the next category. So we just did the primitive. Let's go into less primitive. So it's not mature or on the conscious completely. Less primitive is less for survival and more in reality. Stated in a different way, the person is more ambivalent with the relationship with reality, and reality is recognized here, but they often put it off or avoid it in some way, shape, or form. Let's see what these defense mechanisms look like to make it make a little bit more sense. So, repression, key emphasis on press. So, this is where somebody is pressing down a situation or memory because it's too painful for them to process. So it's an unconscious defense mechanism employed by the ego to keep disturbing or threatening thoughts from being conscious. So if you remember us going through the different levels of the mind, unconscious were things that were difficult for people to bring to the forefront of their consciousness without great deals of effort. A couple of examples to articulate this further. Someone who has a severe childhood abuse history may repress these memories and have a difficult time forming relationships later and not really know why. So their mind has pressed down memories and they're not really sure what is actually going on, but they do have some restrictions within their ability to develop relationships. Another example, a young child exhibits repression when they are afraid of dogs, but cannot remember any experiences that would have made it so. So they are afraid of dogs. They don't really know any events that were negative with dogs, but they experienced it when they were younger. Another example, someone is nervous when taking exams, but does not remember being made fun of during school, yet beats themselves up for not knowing things. So if they don't know things right off the bat, or they feel that other people are doing better than them, they have repressed a memory of other people doing better than them or them being made fun of or abused for not being good enough within situations. The next defense mechanism, displacement, key emphasis on place, because this is where somebody places or puts their emotions onto another person that is less threatening. Stated in a different way, it's taking out our frustrations, feelings, and impulses on people or objects that are viewed as less threatening. Key emphasis on less threatening, because we are not willing to express it on things that are threatening for fear that we would have consequences and or harm done to us. Couple of examples. Someone is mad at their girlfriend, so they yell at their young child. So they're mad at the girlfriend. The girlfriend may have some power within the situation. The young child doesn't really have as much power or say, or could be as harmful for them. So they yell at the child when they want to discuss it with the girlfriend, but it's too difficult for them to have somebody that has the same power level as them. So they go for somebody that is less threatening, which would be the child. Another example, someone did not pass their ASWB exam, so when they get home, they punch a pillow 100 times. They had an event that was very negative towards them, and rather than expressing it in any other way, they punch something that is less threatening. So you are placing that emotion onto something that is less threatening or that will not harm you as much as if you did it in another way. Last example, someone is frustrated with their boss. So instead of yelling at their boss, they punch their computer screen. Again, somebody might be like, didn't the computer screen hurt them still? Yes, it might have hurt, but it hurts less than punching the boss and potentially having legal charges on you. So they placed it onto something that was less threatening within the situation. And it's easier for them to do so because there's less consequences within their situation. The next defense mechanism is intellectualization, key emphasis on intellect. So they utilize their intellect in order to process situations. So these people tend to love information and they utilize information rather than emotionally feeling things and developing that in some way, shape, or form. Stated in a different way, it's the overemphasis on thinking when confronted with an unacceptable impulse, situation, or behavior without employing any emotion. So you are not employing any emotion. However, you are utilizing information to improve your situation. So rather than dealing with the pain associated with emotion, a person will follow up or focus on content within a particular area. A couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Person was recently diagnosed with anxiety and will attempt to learn all about anxiety symptoms rather than expressing their emotions about their diagnosis or engaging in therapy or identifying alternative coping skills. So they want to know everything about the topic rather than emotionally experiencing it. Another example, a person copes with the recent death of a parent by researching the grief process. So rather than grieving the parent, they're looking at all of the stages of grief to understand what they could potentially go through rather than going through it organically. Another example, someone will fail the ASWB exam and learn up different content areas that they missed rather than reflecting on how failing feels for them. So rather than expressing and grieving the loss of failing, they're jumping into as much content as they possibly can to see what they can do within their situation to improve it. And that is the difficult part about it all is they don't emotionally experience it all, but they're hopping on as much information as they possibly can to improve their situation without ever emotionally experiencing it. The next defense mechanism, rationalization, key emphasis on rational, because they are going to attempt to use rational thought or try to create a rational thought based on things that don't really make sense. Stated in a different way, they try to identify excuses for their behavior. And so it's explaining an unacceptable behavior or feeling in a rational or logical manner, which is avoiding the true reason and or multiple reasons for the behavior and or thoughts. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Someone loses a job and says, I did not like the job anyway. And this is different than denial because the person is going to outright deny it or justify it. Rationalization is where somebody's going to acknowledge that it happened and just basically say and downplay the impact that it has on them. Another example, someone gets turned down for a date and says, I had a lot of things going on anyway. Like, I wanted to do this, but my schedule's too booked up and I don't really care. Another example, someone fails their ASWB exam and says, I'm content with my current job. I don't need to pass the exam anyway. It was just kind of a small goal I had in mind, and my life goes on anyway. So they rationalize it. They don't really experience the emotions associated with it, and then it just kind of pents up and takes over in different ways. Another defense mechanism is undoing. So, key emphasis on do, because that is where they are going to try to do something to undo the things that they did that were wrong. So, they are going to try to do something to make up for something that they had done in the situation. Stated in a different way, it's trying to make up for inappropriate and or undesirable thoughts and behaviors that cause isolation from the overall society. So a couple of examples, after cheating on your boyfriend and or girlfriend, you buy them a video game to make up for it. So you do something that you know that they will enjoy in order to get back on their good side. They may not have not even caught you in the situation, but you do it anyway to kind of make up for it without even saying anything. Another example, a husband may do the dishes after insulting his wife to make up for the behavior. So he feels like doing the dishes is going to improve the situation of the insult that he provided towards his wife. Another example, someone missed a date with their significant other, so they buy them flowers and surprise them with it. So they feel like buying the flowers and surprising them is going to make up for them missing something when they are not directly correlated in any way, shape, or form. And the last type of defense mechanism is mature. So these are going to be more conscious, mature thoughts within the person's situation. So someone has a healthy relationship with consciousness and reality. So that is where somebody is conscious of what they're doing and they're entertaining reality within the situation. So they're not ignoring what their behaviors are, but they're channeling it in a different way and or more aware of what their behaviors are and what meaning they have behind it. So reality is accepted, and even when it is not appreciated, They kind of just acknowledge that it exists. And it's an uncomfortable feeling that are deliberately transformed into less threatening ones rather than just setting them aside. And that's what makes them the mature defense mechanisms is the person has a mature thought process of, yes, this is a consideration. I'm just going to channel it in a different way. I'm not going to set it aside, but I'm going to be aware of why I'm doing the behaviors in general. And it's going to make a little bit more sense when I start getting into the examples and provide examples of the particular defense mechanisms under the header of mature defense mechanisms. But sit back and let's see what they look like. So sublimation, key emphasis on sub. Why? Because this is where somebody is going to substitute a positive behavior in place of a negative behavior in order to have a more positive outcome. Stated in a different way, it's acting out unacceptable thoughts, feelings, and or impulses in a more constructive and or positive manner. Couple of examples. A man with a lot of anger may start working out. So expressing his anger by exercising is going to be more healthy than if he Tysons somebody and knocks their lights out. Another example, someone who has a lot of frustration towards a parent may play a violent video game to express their anger. So rather than attacking their parents or yelling at their parents or destroying things in their house, they may play video games to make themselves feel better or to calm down. So they substitute the video games in place of how they would have maladaptively expressed their anger in the past. The last example, someone may draw on themselves to avoid self-harming themselves. So rather than cutting themselves, they may draw on themselves. So rather than picking themselves, they may put spots on themselves. So expressing it in a different way and getting that energy out rather than just repressing it, pushing it down, and or not acknowledging it in some way, shape, or form. The next defense mechanism, suppression, key emphasis on suppress. So if you think of when you suppress something, this is where you kind of silence something and push it down for a temporary moment. So it's voluntarily, consciously avoiding thinking about disturbing thoughts, wishes, feelings, problems, or experiences temporarily. And that's the key emphasis here. It's temporarily, where repression is where you have repressed it and don't ever really acknowledge it after that, but it's an unconscious thing because your mind does it here. Suppression is where you voluntarily or consciously do this behavior. So a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. While taking the ASWB exam, the person isn't thinking about the potential loss of money if they fail. It's not on the person's mind. Like, you're going to lose all the money that you put in. You could lose your job. You can lose insurance, all these different things. They may have thought about it prior to walking into the exam, but they will suppress it because if it's on their mind during the exam, it may negatively impact their situation than if it was not there. Another example, a woman stays at work late to avoid fighting with her husband. She knows that if she goes home, she's going to fight with her husband. So she suppresses that by doing another behavior temporarily because she's going to end up going home anyhow. Another example, someone knows that they are behind on their mortgage, but go to Disneyland anyway. So they suppress the thought of being behind on the mortgage and they live their best life, go to Disneyland anyway. Again, you suppress or silence a thought or urge or behavior for a moment, and then you come back in the situation later on because you can't live at Disneyland forever. So when you come back from Disneyland, you're going to still be behind the mortgage, if not more so. The next defense mechanism is going to be compensation. So key emphasis on compensate because this is where you are going to compensate for something that you have done. So this is different than undoing because this is where you are going to overachieve in one area in order to not acknowledge a deficit in another area. And this is where this one can be kind of like thrived on because it's like, wow, that person really shifted their activity and behaviors in a positive way, and we wouldn't even really focus on the person's negative. Stated in a different way, overachieved in one area to compensate for failures in another. A couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Someone is not good at schoolwork, so they put all of their energy into sports to excel. So they stop doing the schoolwork. They know they're not that good at it, but they may be better at the sports. So they put all their energy and effort into the sports to make up for the gap in the schoolwork. Another example, a husband works a lot, so he buys his wife whatever she wants to make up for the absence of time. In his mind, he's like, I could just spend the extra money, it'll make up for everything. So I will compensate. So I have a deficit in my relationship. My bank account looks nice. So let me compensate for that missed time with whatever she wants. The last example, Phil is not good with time management, so he puts his focus on engaging and performing when he does complete tasks. Not really good at managing time, will go overtime, may show up late, but when he shows up, gives it his 100% shot based on the fact that it allows for people to forget that time management is not his strong suit. Another defense mechanism is altruism. Key emphasis on all. Why? Because this is where somebody tries to benefit every single person at the expense of themselves sometimes. So, stated in a different way, it's helping others that are suffering from similar feelings or experiences who are far less along in dealing with their issues than the person that you're helping. So, you're satisfying your internal needs from helping other people and something that you have been through prior. So, a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Someone who was bullied as a child will start an anti bullying campaign to prevent others from experiencing it. So, they are like, I know what it feels like to be bullied. I'm going to start this anti bullying campaign in order for other children to not have to go through the same things that I did. Another example, someone who lost a friend to cancer may start an organization to spread information on how to lower the risk of cancer. Again, they know what it feels like to lose somebody from cancer. So they are trying to raise awareness of what are things that can lead to cancer, or they try to lower the risk of cancer for other people. The last example, someone struggled with learning how to take exams, so they start making YouTube videos to help people succeed who have failed. Somebody struggles with passing their exam or they struggle with understanding information, so they start making YouTube videos in an easy way for people to understand information to walk into the exam and kick it directly in the chest. Another defense mechanism, internalization. Key emphasis on internal. So, internal means inside of somebody. So, when somebody internalizes something, it changes their entire internal functioning system. And this is where it could be mistaken for a lot of other defense mechanisms that we're about to go over in a little bit. But just remember that internalization is where their internal processing actually changes. Stated in a different way, when someone will make and take on the opinions, values, and feedback from other people and change their identity or self. So, a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Someone tells a person they are dumb and they will never succeed in life. So, regardless of what the person hears from other people or what they do and achieve, they will still feel like they're not ever good enough. So, internalization is where the person internalizes the opinion that they're never going to be good enough, and then, regardless of what they do, they still feel inferior to other people. Another example, someone tells a child that they either are going to end up locked up or dead. That child will remember that message, internalize it, and they feel like they can not do anything but get locked up or die. So they do not try to strive and thrive within their life. Another example, someone hears from their ex girlfriend that they're unlovable and continue to believe it and play it out in future relationships. So, this ex girlfriend played a major role in your life and says, you're never going to be loved by anyone. You're a piece of garbage. You're a piece of crap. You may internalize that and say, I am going to be unlovable by everybody, and everybody is going to treat me the way that you have treated me. So, their internal changes. So, it's changing their internal processing for the totality of their situation. The next defense mechanism, identification. Key emphasis on identify. Why? Because this is going to change the identity or how the person identifies to fit an ideal role. So, stated in a different way, you see something you like and firmly believe in yourself to become that person in order to do it. So, this is where their identity is going to change. But with identification, contrary to internalization, identification, your identity can change multiple times throughout your life. Internalization doesn't really change because it's an internal processing of what the person experienced within their situation. So, a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. Someone who likes Beyonce may start to dress and act like her, but let's say they see somebody else that they like and enjoy, they may start dressing and acting like that other person as well. That's where identification isn't really permanent, internalization is. Another example, someone who is a close relative that is a social worker may become one to be just like them. So they saw somebody that was a social worker that thought they were a cool cat. So now they want to be a social worker just like that person. And that may fizzle out and they may want to do another career path. But for that moment, they think that being a social worker is the coolest thing on the planet. Another example, someone hears that Michael Jordan likes to gamble, so they start to gamble to be just like him. So they start doing a behavior that somebody that they look up to has done, so they can feel like them for a moment. But they may realize that another person does another behavior and they kind of just blend in and chameleon in to whatever that person is doing. So identification is how the person identifies based on a specific role. Internalization is where they internalize what somebody has said, and it's more difficult to change because what's inside of you is more difficult. The next defense mechanism is introjection. Key emphasis on introject. Why? Because you're going to be introducing something into your life. So key emphasis on intro because you're going to be introducing something within your situation. So stated in a different way and explain it, when someone will hear an idea and play it out into their life. So when somebody hears an ideology or an idea, they act it out as if their future is going to look like this. So this is where internalization, identification, and introjection kind of varies. So internalization is where somebody internalizes specifically what somebody has said. Identification is where they identify and their identity can change. Introjection is similar to internalization, but it's where somebody has introduced an idea into your mind and you believe it and do it regardless, and you don't even really realize where it has come from. And the examples will likely make a little more sense, but that's where a lot of times people get tripped up on these. So a couple of examples to articulate a little bit further. Someone hears that they shouldn't get into a pool until 30 minutes after when they eat something. So they've always heard, if I eat something, I have to wait 30 minutes. I'm not getting into that pool. Where that is only introducing a specific idea within the person's mind. Internalization is where it internalizes and changes their entire internal processing. Introjection introduces a new idea. Another example, a child hears that boys do not cry and they start to play it out in their life as if it is true. So they are thinking, I'm not able to cry. But in certain environments and situations, they can kind of be introduced to different things, while internalization would be their internal processing that entire thing. The last example, someone sees a celebrity that they like, use a particular makeup, and they begin to use it to be just like them. And that's where it can be similar to identification, but this is only them introducing small bits of what that person does, not doing everything that the other person does. Because if you're going to identify somebody, you are going to take it on as if you are that person. Introjection is where you're going to introduce or interject something into your life, a small snippet of what that person is doing. The last defense mechanism is going to be asceticism. Key emphasis on set because it is going to be a set way of thinking and they are going to be rigid and only stick to what they know. So they are going to be set in their ways and be stubborn and reject any information that other people do. So, stated in a different way, it's when someone displays rigid behaviors based on ideology that they deem important. So, someone will be stuck in their ways regardless of contradictory information. So, this person has severe discipline and avoids all forms of self indulgence until they accomplish a particular goal. So, asceticism, stated in an easy way, is where you delay pleasure in order to accomplish a particular goal. So, a couple of examples to articulate this a little bit further. A person refuses to eat or sleep until a project is done. So somebody is asceticistic when they are going to avoid pleasure in order to accomplish a particular goal. It's like, I will stop eating until I complete this goal because I want this and this is so important to me. Another example, not watching your favorite TV show to have more time to focus on passing your ASWB exam. So you want to have more focus on passing. So you take your focus off of a TV show, which you may enjoy and love, in order to pass the exam. Another example, avoiding sweets on Thanksgiving because you want to lose weight. You're like, I am going to delay the pleasure that sweet, sweet pie could have in order to accomplish a particular goal, which is a weight loss goal. So it's where you are set in your ways and are not going to let anything infiltrate what your goals are in any way, shape, or form. So those are easy ways to remember psychosexual stages of development, psychoanalytic, the different levels of the mind, the different aspects of personality, id, ego, superego, and then the defense mechanisms which are set in place to secure that the id, ego, and superego are set at bay. Question 1. A 45-year-old client is attending an intake assessment with a social worker at a community mental health clinic. The client reports that he finds it difficult to control his impulses, which has resulted in him stealing and getting into frequent fights with friends. Which personality style is the client most likely aligned with? A. Id, B. Ego, C. Superego, or D. Ego ideal? And when you have your answer, type the word Freud in the chat. Open up the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is A, second place is B, and third place is C and D. Let's look at it. We're meeting with a 45-year-old client. He's attending an intake assessment. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So it's our first time meeting them, and we are a social worker in a community mental health clinic. So that's who we are and where we are at. The client reports he finds it difficult to control his impulses, which has resulted in him stealing and getting into frequent fights with friends. Which personality style is the client most likely aligned with? Let's break down each personality style, compare it back to the question, and see what we're looking at in particular. So, id, easy way to remember this, impulsive decision making. Ego, go. So then we have our evaluate and go. And then with superego, the easy way to remember that is going to be when we go with our super hero, and then ego ideal is going to be tied into the ego, and that is going to be a part of ego when we are doing what people want us to do and more aligned with super ego. And that's where you want to be able to understand particularly what we are looking at when it comes down to everything. So let's look back at a question, see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review, 45-year-old client, intake assessment, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So it's our first time meeting the 45-year-old client. We're a social worker in a community mental health clinic, reports struggling and controlling his impulses. So that is going to be the main detail, is that he's having impulses right here. And his impulsive behaviors are stealing and getting into frequent fights. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out ego ideal. Why? Because we're not trying to be ideal within the situation based on the fact that we're not trying to satisfy anybody in society and or our parents and or caregivers. So again, remember that's tied into doing the ideal, and that falls under our superego based on the fact that we feel compelled to have pride in whatever people want us to do. For that same reason, we're also going to eliminate superego because again, we're aligned with our superhero, and superheroes aren't going to be stealing and get into frequent fights with friends based on the fact that they're going to be the total opposite of that, and they're trying to hurt people. Superheroes are trying to save other people. So now we're in between A and B, id and ego. Id is the impulsive decision making part that is like the devil on the shoulder that's like, hey man, you can do whatever you want. Ego, again, is that cartoon or the human head that is like, what should I do before proceeding? And then that super ego or that superhero is that angel on the shoulder that's like, man, don't do it. It's not a good idea. So we're going to go eliminating B and go with A based on the fact that they're doing impulsive actions and not really considering the consequences for it. And we tie that back to the question by him having difficulty controlling his impulses. He's stealing, getting into frequent fights. So he's acting out of his id. So the correct answer here is A. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 2. A social worker is meeting with a 10-year-old boy that was referred by his teacher for complaints of throwing objects across the room at other students. The boy reports that he finds his schoolwork simple and that he just wants to talk with other students. When the teacher tells him no, he gets angry. What psychosexual stage of development best explains the boy's behavior? A. Phallic. B. Latent. C. Genital. Or D. Anal. And when you have your answer, type the word happy in the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority thinking is B. Second place is D. Third place is A. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker meeting with a 10-year-old boy. We're Furby's teacher for complaints of throwing objects across the room at other students. So there is some impulsivity and or aggressiveness. The boy reports that he finds schoolwork simple and then he just wants to talk with other students. So that is his mission. And when the teacher tells him no, he's getting angry. What psychosexual stages of development best explains the boy's behavior? Let's break down each psychosexual stage of development, compare back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So let's identify the ages and then we'll define the stages as we rule them out. So the phallic stage is going to be 3, 6 years old. The latent is going to be 6 years old to puberty. And then genital is going to be puberty to death. And then anal is going to be 1 to 3 years old. So let's look back at the question and see what we're looking at in particular, and then we'll break it down based on the stages. So quick review. Social worker, 10-year-old boy referred by the teacher, complains of throwing things at other students across the room. He reports he finds schoolwork simple, kind of bored, and he just wants to talk to other students. Teacher tells him no. He's getting angry. So let's look down at each of the answer choices based on this information and break it down based on the stage. So he's 10 years old. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because it's not talking about any toilet training or any anal explosive or anal retentive type behaviors. We're talking about somebody that wants to communicate with other people and just want to get his needs met in that way. So for that reason, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because it's not talking about any sexual deviancy and or sexual behaviors and or intimate things and trying to advance themselves in some way, shape, or form. Phallic would be them about feeling themselves and developing and identifying their anatomy parts. And latent would be that they're late to the party and just want to socialize with other people. So if we look back at the question, he states that he just wants to talk to other people. So the phallic would be more based on him exploring his own body, but he wants to be more social. So for that reason, we're going to rule out A, and we're going to go with B because he picture that person that's late to the party. They're just trying to be social and develop relationships, and he falls within that age range. So again, it's very poignant to understand the ages, but also be able to recognize and apply the different stages and what is contained within them. So the correct answer here is B. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 3. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is working with a family and their 6-year-old son who has been waking up in the middle of the night to sleep with them. The mother reports that her son will not let her out of his sight, and when he cannot see her, he will scream at the top of his lungs. The boy reports that he does not understand why he becomes so frustrated, but he feels like someone's going to take his mother away from him. What psychosexual stage of development best explains the boy's behavior? A. Anal. B. Phallic. C. Oral. D. Latent. And when you have your answer, type the word hope into the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is D. Third place is A. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker, outpatient clinic, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're working with a family and their 6-year-old son, so that is our client system. And the son has been having problems in the middle of the night by waking up and wanting to sleep with them. So our client is going to be the 6-year-old son, and that's why it's important to understand who the client is. The mother reports that her son will not let her out of his sight, and when he cannot see her, he will scream at the top of his lungs. So he's kind of becoming distressed when not around mom. And the boy says that he does not understand why he becomes so frustrated, but he feels like something bad is going to happen and mom is going to get taken away. What psychosexual state of development best explains the boy's behavior? Let's break down each stage by the age and then compare it back to the question and allow for the description of the stage to give us the answer. A, anal is going to be 1 to 3 years old. B, phallic is going to be 3 to 6 years old. Oral is going to be 0 to 1 years old. And then latent, D, is going to be 6 years old to puberty. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, outpatient clinic, family, 6-year-old son, waking up in the middle of the night, wants to sleep with the parents. The mother reports son will not let her out of his sight. When she cannot see him, he'll scream at the top of his lungs. Boy reports, I have no clue why this is happening, but when someone is going to take away my mom, I just feel like it is going to happen. Keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out C. Why? Because the age range is a little bit off, but more importantly, the oral stage is about survival and being able to have that oral fixation. He's not really worried about any of that or having any coping skills that involve his mouth, so that is going to be ruled out. We're also going to rule out D. Why? Because he falls within the age range. However, we need to make sure that he's not trying to socialize. Nowhere in the question does it say that he's trying to socialize or get friends or anything like that. He's still focused on his mom. So he's afraid that someone is going to take his mom away from him. So the answer is going to involve fixation on parents and or trying to get close to them. So now we're in between A, oral, or B, phallic. Anal is about toilet training and anal retentive and anal explosive. Think of an explosive. It's kind of messy, not really keeping things together. Anal retentive, trying to control everything. So we could view this boy as trying to control the conditions of his life. However, phallic, key emphasis on because he's trying to feel himself, understand his anatomy, and there's this important thing that boys go through called the Oedipus complex, which is where they want to be with their mom, and they fear that the father and or other people are going to take them from him. So for that reason, we're going to rule out A, and we're going to go with B because that better fits the age because he's 6 years old, and that's the tail end of the stage. But the more important part is the Oedipus complex relates to what he's articulating, that he feels that someone's going to take his mom away. He doesn't consciously feel this, but he would fall within the stage of the phallic stage. So the correct answer here is B. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 4. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is working with a family and their 15-year-old son who has been skipping school and that they recently caught having sex with one of his peers in their home. The 15-year-old son does not see any issues with his behavior and believes his parents are overreacting and need to loosen up. What psychosexual stage of development best describes the boy's behavior? A, oral, B, latent, C, phallic, or D, genital. And when you have your answer, type the word water in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is D. Second place is B. Third place is C. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient clinic, so that's who we are and where we're at. We're working with a family and their 15-year-old son. So those are our clients. The son has been skipping school and they recently caught him having sex with one of his peers in their home. The 15-year-old son does not see any issues with his behavior and he believes his parents are overreacting and that they need to loosen up. What psychosexual stage of development best describes the boy's behavior? So let's define each stage by the age, compare it back to the question, and then use the description of the stage to pick the answer. A, oral is going to be 0 to 1 years old. Latent, the person is late to the party, 6 years old to puberty. Phallic, where they are feeling themselves, 3 to 6 years old. And then genital is going to be puberty to death. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, outpatient clinic, family, 15-year-old son. Question is focused on the 15-year-old son who is our client, and he has been skipping school, recently caught having sex with one of his peers in the home. 15-year-old son doesn't see any issues and is like, what's the big deal? You guys just need to loosen up. Let's look back at the different answer choices, see what we got, but keep that in mind as we go through them. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because it doesn't talk about any coping skills about the mouth or anything like that. So that is going to be ruled out. It's not trying to survive or thrive in that way. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Because it does talk about him utilizing his anatomy and or having sex. However, doesn't say that he's trying to get with mom and or have any of those Oedipus complex type tendencies or anything like that. So even though he's utilizing that part of his body, doesn't mean that that's where his energy is at. So now we're in between B and D. So this is where it can get pretty tricky, but we have to remember what is going on in each stage. So with the latent, key emphasis on late, the person is feel like they're late to the party, and their key emphasis is that they are going to develop relationships with other people, but their sexual libido is repressed and they're not actively expressing that. And since they had sex with somebody, they're going to be more in the genital stage, which is where all of that repressed sexual libido is now expanded out. And think of that slingshot. What is being repelled must be let go. So for that reason, B is going to be ruled out, and we're going to go with D based on the fact that falls within that age range, as well as the behavior of having sex with somebody is going to be the repressed sexual energy being expressed. So the correct answer here is D. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 5. A social worker is meeting with a 35-year-old who is scheduled to be released from jail within the next week. The woman was charged with an assault and spent the last year in the county jail. The man reports he finds it difficult to control his anger and does not like when people challenge him. The social worker reviews a list of anger management techniques with the man to utilize upon release. The man reports that when he always wanted to learn how to draw and will attempt to do that to express his anger. What defense mechanism is the man most likely utilizing? A. Reaction formation. B. Displacement. C. Sublimation. Or D. Identification. And when you have your answer, type the word joy in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is A. Third place is D. Fourth place is B. Let's look at it. So, a social worker meeting with a 35-year-old who is scheduled to be released from jail within the next week, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So, they're going to be released from jail in the next week. The man was charged with an assault and spent the last year in the county jail. So, we are in the jail with the climb. The man reports that he finds it difficult to control his anger and doesn't like when people challenge him. So his main focus is anger. The social worker reviews a list of anger management techniques with the man to utilize upon release, which would be next week. That's why the length of time is super important. The man reports that he always wanted to learn how to draw and will attempt to do that to express his anger. So he's now going to choose a different behavior than he otherwise would. So let's look at the different defense mechanisms and then compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at. So reaction formation, key emphasis on react and formation. So this is when you react in a different or opposite formation from what you are feeling. Displacement, key emphasis on place. So this is when someone expresses or places their emotions onto something or someone less threatening. Sublimation, key emphasis on substitute. So this is where we're going to be substituting a positive behavior in place of a negative one. Identification, key emphasis on identify. So this is when someone changes their identity based on an ideal role that they have in mind. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at. Quick review. Social worker in a jail meeting with a 35-year-old scheduled to be released from the jail next week. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. The man was charged with an assault, spent the last year in the county jail. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. Man reports he finds it difficult to control his anger, doesn't like when people challenge him. We give him a list of anger management techniques to utilize upon release, which will be next week. And he says he's always wanted to draw and will attempt to do so to express his anger. So keep that in mind as we go through the different answer choices again. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out D. Why? Because it said he didn't want to start drawing based on somebody that he knew that drew. So we don't have any role that he's trying to fulfill because we gave him a list of anger management techniques. It doesn't say, I'm going to start drawing because you drew. It doesn't say that a famous artist started to draw and now he wants to do it. No identification of anyone else. So now we're in between reaction formation, him reacting in an opposite and different formation from how he feels. We look back and he says that he's going to express his anger nonetheless. So it doesn't say that it would be reacting in a different formation. So we would rule that out because it'd be different if he said, I'm going to feel angry and then I'm going to tell people I'm happy and do different happy actions. So he is going to be expressing it, not reacting in a different formation. Now we're in between B, displacement, him placing his emotions onto something less threatening, a sublimation, him substituting a behavior in place of what he normally would have done. So if we look back, it doesn't say that he's going to be placing it. Yes, he's going to be putting whatever his utensil to draw is onto the paper and pressing to express the anger, but it doesn't say that he has any other things that he'd be doing. So for that reason, we're going to be ruling out B. We're going to go with C because he's going to be substituting the drawing in place of the assault that he has been charged with. So that is where displacement, you'd be having to place it somewhere. And yes, he's going to be drawing and stuff, but substituting something would be more along the lines of sublimation. So the correct answer here is C. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 6. A social worker at an outpatient clinic is meeting with a 30-year-old female who was recently fired from her job. The woman reports that she feels like her boss never liked her and that her boss is just jealous of her. The woman reports that she expressed her frustration of being fired by throwing a chair through her office window to avoid from physically harming her boss. What defense mechanism best explains the woman's behavior? A. Denial. B. Projection. C. Reaction formation. Or D. Displacement. And when you have your answer, type the word lions in the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is D. Second place is B. Third place is C. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in an outpatient clinic, meeting with a 30-year-old female. So that is our client. She was recently fired from her job, so that's why she's coming in to see us. The woman reports that she feels like her boss never liked her and that the boss is just jealous of her. The woman reports that she expressed her frustration of being fired by throwing a chair through her office window, and this was an alternative to physically harming her boss. What defense mechanism best explains the woman's behavior? Let's define each defense mechanism, compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. A, denial is not acknowledging an action or behavior by not taking negative criticism or critique. Projection is putting your feelings, behaviors, or thoughts onto someone else. Reaction formation, key emphasis on react, is when you react in the opposite formation from how you are feeling. Displacement, key emphasis on place, and this is when someone expresses or places their emotions by putting them onto something or someone less threatening. So let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review. Social worker, outpatient clinic, 30-year-old female, recently fired from her job. Woman reports she doesn't like the boss. She feels like she's jealous of her. One reports she expressed her frustration of being fired by throwing a chair through the office window. This was based to avoid physically harming her boss. Keep that in mind as we go through each of the answer choices. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because it's not that she's denying the situation in any way, shape, or form. Yes, she kind of downplayed the firing, but we're more focused on the fact that she threw an office chair through the window, and she was willing to say that this is the situation. She stated that she feels her boss never liked her and that she was jealous of her, but it's not that she didn't say that she didn't care about the job or anything like that. She threw the chair through the office window, so that's going to be more of our focus because that's the imminent or immediate harm within the situation. We're also going to rule out B. Why? Because projection, think of a projector on somebody's chest. They're putting the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that they're experiencing onto somebody else. It says that she feels like her boss never liked her. Boss is jealous of her, but it doesn't say that she disliked the boss secretly, and she expressed the frustration again by throwing a chair through the office window, and she wanted to physically harm her boss. So now we're in between C, reaction formation, when you react in the opposite formation from how you're feeling, or D, displacement, key emphasis of place, when you express or place your emotions by putting them onto something or someone less threatening. So you're expressing or placing your emotions on to someone or someone less threatening. And if we look at it, she said she threw the chair through the office window. And it doesn't say that I was angry and then I walked up to the boss and said, "You're the greatest on the planet." She didn't do a reaction formation. She did displacement because she placed or expressed her emotions onto someone or something less threatening, aka the office window. Chair got thrown through it, and she wanted to physically harm the boss, but the boss is a threatening or someone of equal power. So the correct answer here is going to be D, displacement, because she's expressing or placing and putting them onto someone or something less threatening. So the correct answer here is D. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 7. A social worker at a nonprofit agency has been working with a 40-year-old male for 6 months. In the most recent session, he reports he feels like his wife does not appreciate him, and whenever he is around her, has the urge to yell at her. However, instead, he will compliment her. Which defense mechanism best explains the man's behavior? A. Sublimation. B. Reaction formation. C. Displacement. Or D. Projection. And when you have your answer, type the word SEALs in the chat. Opening the polls. Twenty seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is A. Third place is D. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker, nonprofit agency. So that's who we are and where we are at. We're working with a 40-year-old male. So that is our client. For the past 6 months, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. In the most recent session, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So what's going on right now? He reports that he feels his wife does not appreciate him, and whenever he is around him, has the urge to yell at her. So anytime that he's around her, wants to yell. However, instead, he will compliment her. Which defense mechanism best explains the man's behavior? So let's define each defense mechanism, compare them back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. Sublimation, key emphasis on sub, because this is where we are going to be substituting a positive behavior in place of a negative one. So we want to channel something positive so that way we have a more positive outcome. Reaction formation, where key emphasis on react, where we react in a different or opposite formation. So this is where you react in a different and or opposite formation from how you feel. Displacement, key emphasis on place. So this is when someone expresses or places their emotions by putting them onto someone or something less threatening. And then projection, key emphasis on project. Think of a projector on someone's chest. So this is where they're putting their emotions, behaviors, thoughts, or actions onto someone else. So keep that in mind as we go back to the question. So quick review: social worker, nonprofit agency, 40-year-old male, 6 months, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment in the most recent session. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So what's going on right now? He reports when he feels like his wife does not appreciate him. When he's around her, wants to yell. However, he's complimenting her. So keep that in mind as we go back to the defense mechanisms. So right off the bat, we are going to be ruling out projection. Why? Because he's not saying that he doesn't appreciate her and then he's accusing her of not appreciating him. He's just saying he feels she doesn't appreciate him. He has the urge to yell, but he's complimenting her. So he's doing something in a different way than he is actually feeling at this given moment. We're also going to rule out A. Why? Because it doesn't say he's substituting a positive behavior. If anything, he's doing something different. He's not doing an action. So he's feeling like he wants to yell. It'd be different if he was yelling previously and then he started to compliment her, but he's never expressed the yelling. He says he feels like he wants to yell or has the urge, and urge is wanting to do something but not putting it into action. So he hasn't done in an action, so we can't substitute a positive behavior such as complimenting your wife in place of a negative one, which would be the yelling. So he's never expressed the yelling. Now we're in between B, reaction formation, or C, displacement, reaction formation, reacted in an opposite or different formation. So that could be possible because he has the urge to yell, but he's complimenting her instead. Displacement would be where he's expressing or placing his emotions onto something less threatening, and he's reacting still with his wife, doesn't say he's doing anything else. So for that reason, we're going to rule out C. And the correct answer here is going to be B. Reaction formation is reacting in the opposite or different formation. So he wants to yell instead is complimenting. So he has anger, and then he's expressing a more positive vibe. So the correct answer here is B. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 8. A social worker at a community mental health clinic has been working with a 29-year-old male for 4 months. During the most recent session, the man reports that he believes his girlfriend has been cheating on him with multiple friends. He reports that he asked her about the cheating, but each time she denied cheating on him and told him to stop worrying about it. Upon further exploration, the social worker discovers the client has actually been cheating on the girlfriend the past 2 months. What defense mechanism has the boyfriend been using? A, denial, B, displacement, C, sublimation, or D, projection? When you have your answer, type the word tricky in the chat. Opening the polls. 20 more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is D. Second place is A. Third place is B. Fourth place is C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker, community mental health clinic. So that's who we are and where we are at. We're working with a 29-year-old male. So that is our client for the past 4 months, any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at. So during the most recent session, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. The man reports that he believes his girlfriend has been cheating on him with multiple friends. So he kind of worries about it. He reports when he asked her about the cheating, she denied it and told him to stop worrying about it. So kind of denies the behavior. Upon further exploration, so we gather a little bit more information. Social worker discovers his client has actually been cheating on the girlfriend for the past 2 months. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. What defense mechanism has the boyfriend been using? So let's break down each defense mechanism, compare it back to the question to see what we're looking at in particular. Denial is not acknowledging an action or behavior by not taking negative criticism or critique well. Displacement is when someone is expressing or placing their emotions onto something less threatening. Sublimation, key emphasis on sub. This is where we're going to be substituting a positive behavior in place of a negative one. And then projection, key emphasis on project. This is where we're going to be putting a projector on us. This is where we're putting your emotions, thoughts, feelings, and or behaviors onto someone else. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at in particular. So, quick review: social worker, community mental health clinic. So that's who we are and where we are at. 29-year-old male. So that's our client for 4 months. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So during the most recent session, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. He reports he believes his girlfriend has been cheating on him with multiple friends. He asked her about it. She denied it multiple times. Says stop worrying about it. We gather a little bit more information. We found out he's actually been cheating on the girlfriend for the past 2 months. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So he's been seeing us for 4 months. He's been cheating for 2. So 2 of the months out of the 4 that he's been seeing us, he's been cheating. Keep that in mind as we go through the different answer choices. So right off the bat, we're going to be ruling out B. Why? Because displacement is putting someone or expressing emotions onto something less threatening. And that is what we're kind of looking at, is doing all the things. And he's not placing anything. If anything, the girlfriend is at the same power level of him, and he's not expressing anything and doing all the stuff that we're looking at in particular. So he's accusing her of cheating. He's actually been cheating. So he is accusing her of something he has been doing. Displacement would be where emotions are being expressed onto something less threatening. That is not present in this situation. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Because sublimation is going to be substituting a positive behavior in place of a negative behavior. He is cheating. Cheating is not a positive behavior, and he's not replacing it with any negative behavior. But if you said, I used to cheat on my girlfriend, but now I go to the gym or I go for runs, that is what we're going to be looking at this moment. So that's where you want to be careful and see what in particular you're looking at. Now we're in between A, denial, so not acknowledging the action in any way, shape, or form, or D, projection, putting your emotions, thoughts, feelings, and or behaviors onto somebody else, and kind of admitting that the behavior exists, but prior you'd have been putting it on someone else. Let's look back at the question to see what we're looking at. So he says he believes his girlfriend's cheating on him. He confronts her about it. She denies it. And then we find out he's actually been cheating. So the man has been cheating on the girlfriend. So that is where he was probably denying it and saying, like, this isn't true or anything like that. But he came out and was like, yo, I've actually been doing this behavior and I was putting it on to her. So we're going to rule out A and we're going to be going with D. Why? Because he had a projector on his chest. He was cheating. He accused her of cheating. And that's what it looked like. So the correct answer here is D, projection. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 9. A social worker in a private practice is completing an intake assessment with a 44-year-old male regarding a recent embezzlement charge. The man reports that he has been under a lot of stress and that being fired from his job has negatively impacted his quality of life. The man reports that he does not understand why he's being charged with embezzlement since his coworker was the person who stole the money. The man reports that his lawyer showed him a video of him signing a fraudulent check, but he does not remember ever doing it. What defense mechanism best explains the man's situation? A. Suppression. B. Repression. C. Denial. Or D. Rationalization. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're looking forward to next week. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is C. Second place is A and B. Third place is D. Let's look at it. So we're a social worker in a private practice. So that's who we are and where we are at. We're completing an intake assessment. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So it's our first time meeting with a 44-year-old male. So that is our client. And he is coming in based on an embezzlement charge that he received. And the man reports that he's been under a lot of stress and being fired from his job negatively impacted his situation. The man reports that he does not understand why he's being charged since his coworker was the one who stole the money. And then the man reports that his lawyer showed him a video of him signing a fraudulent check. He does not remember doing it. What defense mechanism best explains the man's situation? So let's define each defense mechanism, compare them back to the question to see what we're looking at. In particular, suppression is where someone is avoiding the thought or feeling of something And the key emphasis here is temporarily and acknowledging it later. So it's only temporary. Repression, key emphasis on repress. So it's going to be pressing down feelings and or emotions that are too painful to process, and it's often related to trauma. Denial is not acknowledging an action or thought by not taking negative criticism or critique well. And then rationalization is explaining an unacceptable behavior or feeling in a rational or logical manner. So keep that in mind as we look back at the question. So, quick review: social worker, private practice, completing an intake assessment, any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So, it's our first time meeting. 44-year-old male regarding a recent embezzlement charge. Man reports he's been under a lot of stress, being fired from his job, negatively impacted his quality of life. Man reports he does not understand why he's being charged with embezzlement. His coworker was the one that stole the money. The man was showing him video, and he does not remember this ever happening. Keep that in mind as we go through each defense mechanism, aka answer, choice. Right off the bat, we're going to rule out A. Why? Because in suppression, they temporarily suppress it, but actively bring it back consciously, but he does not remember ever doing it in any way, shape, or form. Suppression would be knowing that he did it and then going back later and then being like, yep, I totally did it, and being able to remember. He denies ever doing this. And even when shown evidence, he's like, man, I can't even really believe this happened. We're also going to rule out D. Why? Because he doesn't really admit to the unacceptable behavior. He's not rationalizing. He doesn't really have logic about it. He does say that his coworker was the one that stole the money, but that is based on the fact that he does not remember ever doing it. Rationalization would be like, well, my coworker was doing it too, so it's not even really a big deal. Everybody was doing this. He simply does not remember it ever happening. So now we're in between B and C. Repression is pressing down feelings or emotions that are too painful. It's an unconscious thing that your mind does, and it's often related to trauma. Denial is not acknowledging an action or thought by not taking negative criticism. So either outright denying it and or providing justification with facts in the situation. So he does say that his coworker was the one that stole the money. So he does remember embezzlement happening. However, he doesn't remember his part in it. So for that reason, we're going to rule out C because he has no recollection of it happening. So we're going to go with B because it was pressed down in his mind because he did do this situation based on the video evidence. So he does remember part of it, but doesn't remember the other part because his mind pressed it down out of his cognition. So the correct answer here is B, repression. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 10. A social worker at a family agency is completing an intake with a 42-year-old female who reports having relationship problems. The woman reports that her boyfriend has been getting frustrated with her spending habits, and at times it causes them to fall behind on bills. The woman reports that she has an admiration for Kylie Jenner and feels compelled to buy whatever she releases so she can be just like her. Which defense mechanism best explains the woman's behavior? A. Intellectualization. B. Internalization. C. Asceticism. Or D. Introjection. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you're blessed to have in your life right now. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is D. Second place is B. Third place is C. Fourth place is A. Let's look at it. We're a social worker, family agency, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're completing an intake any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints the picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So it's our first time meeting. 42-year-old female. She reports having relationship problems, so that's why she's coming in to see us. The woman reports that her boyfriend has been getting frustrated with her spending habits, so she's spending money. And at times it causes them to fall behind on bills, so there's a clinically significant impact. The woman reports that she has an admiration for Kylie Jenner and feels compelled to buy whatever she releases. So she's kind of wanting to be like this person so she can be just like her. Which defense mechanism best explains what the woman's behavior is? So let's go up a little bit, give ourselves some room to operate with. Let's define each defense mechanism and then compare back to the question. A, intellectualization is where someone obtains information around a stressor in life and avoids feeling emotion around it. So they strive to understand rather than feel. Internalization is when someone will take the opinions, feedback, values of others and play it out in their life. So their internal changes. Asceticism is when someone has a set way of doing things, aka they are rigid and stubborn in their situation, or stated in a different way, they delay pleasure to accomplish a goal. And then introjection, key emphasis on intro. So this is when someone will hear an idea from someone they admire / look up to and play it out in their life. So they introduce something new in their life. So let's look back at the question and see what we're looking at in particular. So quick review: social worker, family agency, completing an intake any length of time. Hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So it's our first time meeting a 42-year-old female. Reports having a relationship issue, so that's why she came in. Reports her boyfriend has been getting frustrated about her spending habits. Times it causes her to fall behind on bills. She has an admiration for Kylie Jenner. Feels compelled to buy whatever she releases based on the fact that she wants to be just like her. So keep that in mind as we go through each answer choice. So right off the bat, we're going to rule out A. Why? because she's not intellectualizing anything. She's not getting information about anything and trying to do whatever she wants to do within the situation to avoid emotion. If anything, she's buying something to alleviate emotion, but not getting information as a way to understand the situation. We're also going to rule out C. Why? Because she does have a set way of doing things. However, it's not delaying pleasure to accomplish a goal. If anything, she's indulging in a ton of pleasure, doesn't really have a particular goal. It's causing a negative impact on the person's functioning. Yeah, she wants to be just like Kylie Jenner, but she's expounding money, which is not delaying pleasure. It's having too much pleasure based on the fact that the boyfriend's like, hey, slow the spending down. Now we're in between B, internalization, where someone has opinions, feedback, and values that she's instilling in her life, often introduced at a young age, and it then changes their entire internal processing. Or D, introjection, where something was introduced to her and she tries to play it out in her life and she wants to have new ideas. And it's a particular thing about them that she enjoys. So if we look back at the question, she has an admiration for Kylie Jenner and wants to be just like her, but it doesn't say someone at a young age, say you're going to be like Kylie Jenner, and she's not playing that out in her life. It's kind of a recent thing. So for that reason, we're going to rule out B. Why? Because her whole internal processing isn't like, I need to be Kylie Jenner or anything like that. It's something that was introduced into her life, or if you think of something that was injected into her situation, she wants to be like Kylie Jenner, and it may last for a decent amount of time. However, it could also wax and wane, and she could do something else that was introduced into her life. And it's only a small snippet of the situation because she only buys the things that she releases, but that's not her entire identity or anything like that. So the correct answer here is D, introjection. So that's how we look at that question in particular. Question 11. A social worker at a family agency is meeting with a 50-year-old male, reports having feelings of depression. The man reports that his wife divorced him 3 months ago and that he has not felt right since. The man reports that no one outside of his family knows about the divorce because he's been more productive at work. The man reports that without work, he would feel entirely useless. Which defense mechanism best explains the man's reaction to the divorce? A. Asceticism. B. Compensation. C. Sublimation. Or D. Suppression. And when you have your answer, type one thing that you learned from the session tonight. Opening the polls. Twenty more seconds. Shutting down the polls. The majority think it is B. Second place is D. Third place is A and C. Let's look at it. We're a social worker in a family agency, so that's who we are and where we are at. We're meeting with a 50-year-old male, so that is our client. He reports having feelings of depression, so that's what made him come into session. The man reports his wife divorced him 3 months ago. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. So he got a divorce 3 months ago, and then he's not been feeling right since. So he's been having symptoms of depression for 3 months. Man reports that no one outside of his family knows about the divorce because he's been more productive at work. The man reports that without work, he would feel useless. Let's define each defense mechanism and compare back to the question. So what's going on with this man in particular. A, asceticism is when someone has a rigid set of ways of doing things. They will delay pleasure to accomplish a particular goal. Compensation is when someone is going to be overachieving in one area to compensate for another area or to make up for failures. Sublimation, key emphasis on sub. This is because we're going to be substituting positive behavior in place of a negative one. And then suppression is going to be avoiding the thought or feeling of something. And the key emphasis here is temporarily and acknowledging it later. So keep that in mind as we look back at the question. So quick review. Social worker, family agency, 50-year-old male, reports having feelings of depression. So that's what's brought him in. Man reports his wife divorced him 3 months ago. Any length of time, hop on top of it because it paints a picture of what we're looking at this given moment. And he's not felt right since. So for the past 3 months, feeling the symptoms of depression associated with the divorce. Man reports that no one outside of his family knows about the divorce because he's been more productive at work. Man reports that without work, he would feel useless. So keep that in mind as we go back to the answer choices to see what's going on with this guy in particular. So right off the bat, we're going to be ruling out C. Why? Because he's not substituting any positive behavior in place of a negative one. If it said that he was overachieving at work, or he's more productive at work, and before he was utilizing alcohol or substances or drugs or self-harming or anything like that, we may have more sublimation, but it just says, I had a divorce, I'm now more productive, and I'm not really expressing my emotions in any way, shape, or form. Because again, no one outside of his family knows anything about this, so he hasn't really told anybody because he's been more productive at work. So he increases productivity to kind of cope in the best way that he knows how. We're also going to rule out D. Why? Because it's not like he's avoiding a thought or feeling temporarily. He said for the past 3 months, I've been throttling down, I've been doing this, and he's not really doing it temporarily. He's been doing it consistently and overachieving at work based on the fact that that's how he's going to cope. So now we're in between A, asceticism, when someone has a rigid way of doing things to delay pleasure to accomplish a particular goal, or compensation, overachieving in one area due to a failure in another area, or to make up and compensate for a deficit that exists. So asceticism would mean that he has a particular goal that he's trying to accomplish, but he's delaying pleasure in order to do so. We look back at the question. It doesn't really have a particular goal based on the fact that he was divorced and now we became overproductive at work. If it said that I'm overworking or I'm working more hours because I want to do X, Y, or Z or go on a trip, want to pay for something for somebody, that's a different story, but he doesn't really have a particular goal. So for that reason, we're going to rule out A. And B would be the best answer because he had a failed relationship and he's being more productive at work in order to drive and thrive in one area of his life, which is his professional life. So everyone else around him is like, wow, this guy is killing the game based on the fact that he's more productive when he has a failed thing in a situation to try and hide it. So he's being more productive at work. So the correct answer is B, because in compensation, you overachieve in one area in order to hide a failed area within your life. So the correct answer here is B, compensation. So that's how we look at that question in particular.